Okay, we're going to talk about different types of transmission pumps. And in the past, and even in the relatively recent history, we still have sometimes we'll find what's called a rotor type pump, or G rotor, G-E-R-O-T-O-R, okay, G rotor. And of course, this is part of the pump assembly, obviously. This is what we call a stator half, because this has got the stator support shaft. Anyhow, we have the large area, or the inlet, and the smaller area, or the outlet. The same is true over here. The large inlet and the small outlet. Fluid comes in, gets squoze down, comes out high pressure. Okay? Even as I lift these rotors out of their position, we see a large cavity. As the fluid gets squozed down, it gets delivered to a smaller cavity. Okay. Well, ASE would like to, sometimes they'll ask you, what kind of pump is this? And of course, this is a G rotor. They'll also ask you, what is the technician measuring here? And of course, that would be the outer or driven rotor to the pump housing. And this one actually measures closer to about 3 thousandths. 2 thousandths, as I just used, was falling, fell in there pretty easy. 3 thousandths has some drag. Okay? The G rotor, the driven one. Okay? I'll get him to fall in here eventually. There we go. A measurement that it might have you observe or look at would say, well, what is the technician measuring here? Well, he's measuring the clearance between the inner rotor tip and the outer rotor's tip, and I can fit 2 thousandths in there, and that's where we are. Okay, so that's a second measurement, inner to outer rotor tip measurement. A third measurement would be using a straight edge, and it's going to be measuring the clearance between the face of the pump and the face of the gears. So let's call this rotor face to pump housing. Now 2 thousandths is probably lifting this up a little tiny bit. I don't have a 1/1000th feeler gauge. A 1/1000th would probably slide through here. I mean, out here where it's resting on the, where it's resting on the edge. I guess I'm not in all the way. There we go, now I'm in all the way. Okay, out here, we're not going to fit anything because that's resting on the edge of the pump. Okay, but here on the face of the gear, the side clearance, okay, pump gear side clearance might also be a term they use. Rotor side clearance to pump housing. Okay, enough of the G rotor. Let's pull in a gear, and it's much the same. We have an inner or driven gear by the torque converter, and we have an outer gear, okay? We have the large area and the small area. So the fluid is coming into this pump, okay, down here, and it gets squozed down and delivered out here off to the rest of the transmission. If you can see that large area and this small area where it comes out. And I'll put this back in place, the driven gear. And one measurement they might ask about, once again, is what is the clearance between the driven gear and the housing? And I'm going to try 2 thousandths again, and 2 seems to fit really easily. Let's try 3 thousandths, and again, 3 thousandths is got some resistance or drag to it. Okay. This is the crescent, this crescent-shaped device, right? They might also ask you, what is the technician measuring here? And you would say outer gear to crescent clearance. Okay, have the tips of these teeth worn down. And again, this entire pump is a cast iron as well, and they hold up pretty good. You got to have a lot of debris going through the system to chew up a cast iron pump. It happens, but here's 3 thousandths. And I could probably fit a 4 thousandths one in there, but I'm not going to go over that anymore. So again, the driven gear to the crescent would also be a measurement here, okay, is what they would have you select. They don't make it difficult, but you need to know some terminology. Inner and outer gear, crescent, and of course the clearance between the driven gear or the drive gear and the crescent and the driven gear and the crescent, and of course the driven gear and the housing. One more, just like the G-rotor. They want to know what is the technician measuring here, and of course I got a straight edge and it's resting on the face of the pump housing or pump body, and this driven gear, or I'm sorry, the drive gear has got easily 2/1000 clearance. The driven gear barely fits 2. Of course, I'm over where the crescent is. Let's get over here maybe. And it's probably closer to 1.5 thousandths, okay? We got to be able to have some clearance between the face of these gears and when its cover is put on, because when these gears get hot, they'll expand a little bit. And we want them to always turn freely, okay? Okay, so that's the gear or G-rotor type pumps. Let's now focus, and I've got this pump resting on a torque converter, okay? A variable vane pump, really common obviously in today's world. I got one more bolt to pull off here, and this will be all opened up. All right, I'm going to pull off again the stator half of the pump. Here's the stator support shaft for the torque converter's stator, right? And we have much the same things. We have a larger opening and a smaller opening. Looks a little different, but the principles are the same. Set that aside. Now, I'm going to rotate the torque converter, because again, the converter is what rotates this pump, right? So there we go. We'll get things lined back up. And this rotates. And of course, the fluid would come in a large side and be delivered to another smaller side, right? And the principle of rotation is no different. But even on these pumps, they'll have you use a straight edge. Okay, so having removed this from the torque converter, the torque converter, of course, rotates these blades, okay, this variable vane pump. And when engine load is light, the pressure regulator, which is a valve inside the pump here, this valve inside here, okay, it's going to perhaps divert fluid, and the electronic pressure control solenoid operates that valve. It's going to reduce pressure and volume by moving this slide ring, okay? And as you can tell, this side and this side become more equal as the slide ring gets moved. And that would be like cruise RPM or cruising speeds, light loads. This would be like acceleration on heavy loads, supplying the clutches with high pressure. And probably the only measurement for these, and only a machinist would have to worry about this measurement on this kind of pump, because sometimes if the pump face and the pocket that all this sits in gets all chewed up, they can actually resurface this. They'll knock about 0.010 of an inch off that pocket, and then they'll have to knock all a little off here as well to keep that pocket, depth. Whatever they remove inside that pocket, they've got to remove out here, so that this arrangement up here, these components up here, don't have any kind of interference. And so about the only specification on these, of course, would be this slide ring and the drive gear, okay, that supports all these blades, a clearance between the pump's housing, okay, and that slide, which I'm not really registering anything. I am on the pump, the drive gear, okay, but the slide that moves, I guess it doesn't have to be as free because it only moves slightly, whereas this is constantly rotating. So there is a difference between these two, okay. Never seen any specifications on that, but again, a machinist would have to worry about it if they've resurfaced this pump, again, the pocket. and this surface here. Whatever they take off inside the pocket, they got to take off outside on the face. So there's our pumps. We got variable vane, variable displacement, gear, and G-rotor. Okay.
Inch gauge. It's about a $200 tool, if you can appreciate that. Well, it's pretty simple, doesn't it? But it helps us determine some clearance so we don't ruin a transmission. So we're going to come down, and Calvin here is going to set it on the transmission housing where the pump rides. It's a nice flat surface there. And this little rod is sitting down inside on top of the sun gear. So both sides are nothing but more than a stabilizer. He's got it resting on the sun gear. He's tightened all the knobs.
Yep.
Now we're going to flip the gauge over and go put it on the pump, because that's the next thing that goes in this transmission. Let me get the camera over here. So now we've got the H gauge on the pump, and we're going to measure the clearance between this little gap and this little shim here. There's a shim here. Go ahead, Curtis, and I think the specification is 8 to 15.
Yep.
And he's using what? How thick?
8 thousandths.
8, and we're looking pretty close to 8, aren't we? Or
Yep.
could you get a 9 in there or not?
Try
Get a 9.
I mean, we got 8. There's no way you're going to fit 15 in there, so we've reached our goal.
Yeah.
But again, this H gauge, we don't want this to put any pressure on the sun gear down inside the transmission. We've got to have a little bit of clearance. As things expand, 9
We're
works?
getting a 9 in there.
Okay, I think we've got the message
Yeah.
across. Maybe a 10 will go, but I'll bet you we're about done. That gear, not on the teeth, but right beside the teeth.
Yes, right there.
Yeah. Okay. And that's an automatic transmission H gauge.